I met a lot of millionaires, you know, because there's a lot of millionaires in rock and roll, and the more money they got, the more miserable they are.
Lemmy was ugly, broke for half his life, and smelled like smoke and whiskey. And that's why people loved him.
Thank you, everybody.
I think Lemmy is the epitome of rock and roll.
He clawed his way out of English pubs and piss-soaked flats with nothing but a bass, a throat full of gravel, and a stubborn commitment to live life on his own insane terms.
So I've always kind of looked up to Lemmy in terms of the great kind of figurehead of the rock and roll world.
He is proof that outcasts sometimes win, not because they change, but because they double down on being exactly who they are. This is the legendary story of Lemmy. Born Ian Fraser Kilmister on Christmas Eve in 1945 in England in a town named Stoke-on-Trent, Lemmy's legend began humbly. His father left before he was old enough to remember him, so he was raised by his mother.
I was raised good. My mother was a smart woman, and she was intelligent, and she was like straight, you know. I didn't yearn for my father, you know, to take me fucking hunting, you know, like I didn't miss the comradely grasp of the grizzled chin, you know. Who cares, you know? I was doing all right. I just never missed a father because I never had one, you know, so I didn't care. I mean, my mother had a couple of boyfriends, you know, when I was a little kid, but like uncle this and uncle that, you know, they never lasted long.
At the age of 10, Lemmy and his mother moved to a farm in North Wales. At school, he stuck out like a sore thumb, one English kid surrounded by 700 Welsh. They didn't like him, didn't want him, and they made damn sure he knew it. That sense of being on the edge of things, never quite fitting in, wasn't just a childhood memory, it became part of who he was. As a teenager in the late 50s and early 60s, Lemmy found the two things that would shape his life: rock and roll and women. He grew up in a holiday resort town where summers brought waves of tourists and plenty of girls for him to chase.
Yeah, well, we used to get all these chicks came down to, because I lived in a holiday resort, so you get different girls would come down certain weeks, so you'd plan your summer ahead, you know.
Lemmy chased girls and music records with equal zeal.
What were the most important records to you in forming who you are, your own voice?
I don't know. Little Richard, obviously. The MC5, Jerry Lewis. Some Elvis, but be picky. Eddie Cochran. There's a lot of really good singers back then, you know, and it was like the punk thing. They were here and gone in 2 years.
As a teenager, Lemmy got his first guitar and started teaching himself by copying records.
I just heard rock and roll and that was it. That was the end of seeking for a right job, you know. that was it, you know.
At 16, he even saw the Beatles at the Cavern Club in Liverpool, an experience that changed his life forever.
And I saw the Beatles about 3 times up there, I think. And then I saw them again in London and Odeon when they got big, you know. They were excellent, yeah. I mean, later on you couldn't tell what they were doing because of the screams, you know, like, they were really a good band. At the Cavern, they were great, you know. Eating sausage rolls in between songs, singing with your mouth full, you know. Like.
The Beatles were loud, wild, and sexy, and Lemmy liked that.
The Beatles changed the world, you know. They really did.
He would later say he preferred the Beatles to the Rolling Stones, and that John Lennon was the true rebel rock star.
And this guy was surrounded by all these chicks. And I thought, that's the job for me, you know what I mean? All them girls. Well, he was always the asshole of the band, you know, like, He was always the one that was really unpopular with everybody outside the band because he would undermine them, you know. He was good at that. And people would miss his books, you know, because if you read his books, he's not the peace-loving, nice guy that you heard about, you know.
By the mid-60s, Lemmy was playing guitar in local bands. In 1965, he landed in a Blackpool group called the Rockin' Vickers, almost by chance. One night, their guitarist stormed out after a fight, and Lemmy, who had been hanging around as a kind of manager, grabbed a guitar and filled in.
And this particular night, we had a big argument at the Top 20 Club at Failsworth, near Manchester, and off they went. And Lemmy says, "I'll do it." And we went, "Get out of it, Lemmy." He went, "No, come on." And he got on stage, and I'll tell you what, you wouldn't have known any. He made the sound of two guitars, a lead guitar and a rhythm guitar. And he never stopped after that. You couldn't believe what he churned out of them amplifiers.
There he was, a young bloke with a Beatle haircut and a guitar, getting his first real taste of popularity.
We decided that we'd have a three lineup at the front and the bass player at the back. Lemmy was so popular, he went to the front. I went in the middle, vocalist. Siggy with his drums went to the left-hand side. In the mid-60s, it was different. People weren't used to that. So you got three personalities at the front vying for the attention of the girls in the audience. So the three to go at. And we were crazy.
The Rockin' Vickers never made it big, but they did cut a few singles and tour across the UK and Europe. For Lemmy, it was the perfect training ground for the rock and roll life that lay ahead.
Well, we got in the charts with one single, Dandy, Ray Davies song from the Kinks. That got to about number 34, I think, or something in the charts.
In 1967, Lemmy moved to London right as the psychedelic scene was exploding. The city offered everything, music, drugs, and endless opportunities. He briefly joined a psychedelic band playing guitar and even singing on one album. But the real break came by chance. He became a roadie for Jimi Hendrix. Lemmy had befriended a guy who helped Hendrix with his gear on the road and ended up essentially squatting in his apartment. So, whenever this guy needed an extra pair of hands, Lemmy was right there.
You were part of the crew at the time then?
Well, there's only two of us.
Right. What were you doing?
Seems ridiculous now, there's only two of us doing all Hendrix's stuff. All Hendrix's stuff, two of us.
He tuned Jimmy's guitars, hauled his amps, and picked up the pieces of Hendrix's smashed effects pedals after shows. In the process, Lemmy got a master class in rock and roll mayhem, but also got introduced to LSD.
Man, I was Jimi Hendrix's roadie, what do you expect? You know? I mean, he come back from America with 100,000 tabs of acid, right?
Who, Jimmy had?
Yeah, it wasn't even illegal then, he brought it back in his suitcase. And he gave half of it around the crew. I mean, that's a lot of acid.
And what were you were part of the crew?
Being a roadie for Hendrix didn't exactly pay the bills, but it gave Lemmy something better, a front row education in how to become a fucking rock star. By the late 60s, Lemmy had floated through different bands and racked up a lifetime's worth of stories, but he still hadn't made a name for himself. The turning point came with Hawkwind, a band at the center of Britain's experimental space rock movement. Meeting them would launch Lemmy into the next phase of his life. In 1971, Lemmy joined the London-based psychedelic space rock band Hawkwind as their bassist, despite the small detail that he never actually played bass before that. True to form, Lemmy just plugged in and went for it.
And then I showed up to go for the guitar player job with Hawkwind, and we found out they weren't going to get another guitarist. They were going to carry on with the Dave Brock playing lead, but the bass player never showed up because it was a free gig. And he left his guitar in the gear van. Can you imagine how dumb that is? You know, so it's like steal my gig, so steal his gig, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. On his bass, you know. just about an insult to injury. That was the first time I ever played a bass. Yeah.
Adapting his guitar chops to the bass, he developed a unique style, cranking out distorted chords and rumbling riffs rather than traditional bass lines. It was unorthodox, but it gave Hawkwind's trippy music a dangerous, propulsive edge.
Yeah, it was quite an education because, I mean, bass was easy for me, you know. That was where I was supposed to be. I was supposed to play bass, you know.
Lemmy could more than hold his own in a band notorious for its chemical intake. Hawkwind's members were serious acid heads, living in a perpetual haze of LSD and psychedelic drugs.
Yeah, it was a lot of acid. Believe me, it was a lot of acid. Because you know they say it doesn't work 2 days in a row. We found out if you double the dose, it does. So.
Then came 1972. Lemmy hijacked the mic for Silver Machine, a song that shouldn't have worked but somehow clawed its way to the top of the charts. Overnight, they weren't just a cult act, they were packing halls across Britain. The gigs looked like an alien invasion, lights melting your pupils, smoke choking the air, and Lemmy's bass rattling your teeth. But let's be real, everyone in that band was high out of their skulls. However, while Hawkwind's cosmic weirdos loved acid, the drug that turned concerts into kaleidoscope space missions, Lemmy eventually started grinding his teeth on speed. So, the rest of the band eventually started complaining that he was bringing bad vibes because while they floated through hallucinations, he was buzzing like he was plugged into an electric socket, ready to fight and drink all night.
I was the last speed freak, see, I was the one that kept them all awake nights, you know, and shit like that, so they were all like dedicated dope smokers and taking acid, man, and you know, all that. And I was taking acid too, but I was a speed freak as well, you know, and Dick Mick was the speed freak. He got me into the band so he could have somebody to chum out with, you know. And then he left and I was the only one left, so they were dying to get rid of me, really, ever since he left, you know.
The breaking point came in May 1975. As Hawkwind crossed into Canada for a gig, customs officials stopped them, ripped through Lemmy's stuff, and found white powder. They thought it was coke and tossed him in jail. He spent the night in jail, only for the charges to be dropped when the lab revealed the substance was actually speed and not cocaine, as he had been originally accused of. Ironically, this technicality saved him from prosecution. But Hawkwind had enough of him. They fired him on the spot. To him, it was pure hypocrisy. If he'd been caught with acid, the band would have treated him like a victim. Instead, they tossed him aside.
When you started Motörhead, that was after you was kicked out of Hawkwind because of drugs.
Well, because of the wrong kind of drugs.
Yeah.
They were all taking drugs too, it was just different drugs, you know.
Lemmy came home to England furious and inspired. He wanted a band that was fast, filthy, and dangerous. His first name idea said it all, Bastard. But his manager thought it was career suicide.
So were you kind of clear-eyed about the band's commercial prospects from the start, or?
Well, no, I wanted to call it Bastard. And then our manager pointed out that we probably wouldn't get a lot of TV, you know.
So, Lemmy twisted the blade and came up with Motörhead, street slang for a speed addict. Also, it was the title of the last song he'd written for Hawkwind. Motörhead's first lineup featured guitarist Larry Wallace of the Pink Fairies and drummer Lucas Fox. They were a messy trio and the early days were rough. Crowds in London didn't know whether to cheer, boo them, or cover their ears.
If it's a great audience, it's better, you know, obviously, but if it's a bad audience, we keep playing till they like it, you know.
By the end of 1975, Motörhead were crowned the best worst band in the world.
I don't know, we were just not a very good band, you know.
Most bands would have been humiliated, but Lemmy pushed through.
We won a contest in one of the music papers. We were the best worst band in the world. There's a category all for us, all by ourselves. And that killed our career for about 2 years, you know, we almost broke up.
If Motörhead was too loud, too sloppy, too much, that meant they were doing it right.
you know, which was great, you know. That's how it should be. If your dad says, turn that shit down, you're doing it right.
Motörhead's first shot at an album in 1976 was a disaster.
Have you written any songs directly as a consequence of doing drugs?
Oh, all of them.
The record was so bad that their label refused to release it, dropped them, and both Wallace and Fox left the band. But once again, Lemmy didn't give up. So he went hunting for new bandmates and came back with guitarist Eddie Clark and drummer Phil Taylor. Two maniacs as reckless as he was. That's when Motörhead stopped being a mess and started being a weapon. In early 1977, they recorded their self-titled debut, Motörhead. The sessions lasted just 2 days, fueled by desperation and amphetamines. The album saw a release on a new label, cracking the UK top 50. But more important than the charts, it nailed Motörhead's identity: punk speed, metal volume, and Lemmy's rasp. Seeing Motörhead live was like standing in front of a jet engine. Deafening volume, zero polish, and pure chaos. They were too violent for punk, but also too filthy for metal. But that's why both sides love them. Motörhead didn't just bridge the gap, they bulldozed it.
Well, the thing is the funny thing about, like, I felt about Motörhead is that you guys really brought the bridge between punkers and people that were so-called heavy metalers.
Well, it wasn't really a bridge, it was just that there were odd ones that they accepted, you know, and we were one of them.
Motörhead formed back in 1975 during the middle of the punk rock explosion in England. I asked bass player and group founder Lemmy if there was a problem being a heavy metal band in the punk era.
No, we got accepted by the punk thing completely. I don't know. Well, I suppose it was because our music was the same sort of pace and the same sort of ferocity as they were, you know.
Because we talk to anybody?
Yeah, right, because we don't mind who we talk to. It was easy, you know. We used to do gigs that did the adverts and then Motörhead and then the Damned, you know. And we got the odd bottle, that was about all. But the adverts got more bottles than we did, so that was all right. Yeah.
This one's called, with our usual talent for picking nice, homely titles, Shoot You in the Back.
By 1979, Motörhead had broken through to the mainstream of British rock without softening their sound. That year saw the release of Overkill and Bomber, two back-to-back albums that established their authority. The title track of Overkill introduced double-kick drumming like machine gun fire, something pretty much unheard of at the time, and that would become foundational for thrash and speed metal years later. The band was evolving. They sounded tighter, faster, and possibly more aggressive. Lemmy stood at the center, mic tilted down so he sang upward, head back, bass slung low. With hair flying, he embodied raw rock rebellion, spitting songs of gambling, war, and life on the road. By the end of 1980, Motörhead dropped an atomic bomb, Ace of Spades. At just under 3 minutes, it condensed the band's entire ethos into one track: gambling imagery, relentless speed, and one of the most recognizable bass riffs ever recorded. It wasn't crafted to fit radio, yet it still climbed to number 15 on the UK singles chart. For a band long considered outsiders, Ace of Spades made them impossible to ignore. The Ace of Spades album that followed became Motörhead's defining masterpiece. Pure speed, pure filth, and zero apologies. Critics who once laughed at them suddenly had to choke down the truth. This band had cracked something primal.
You've adopted the Ace of Spades as your motif. Why the Ace of Spades?
Because it's bad luck. Ace of Spades is bad luck, isn't it? See? So we figured if we use bad luck as our theme, then it can't get any worse.
In 1981, Motörhead dropped No Sleep Till Hammersmith, a live album so brutal and ear-splitting it felt almost dangerous to listen to. And it still debuted at number 1 in the UK. I mean, to put this in context, We're talking about a Motörhead live album, something as raw, as ugly, and as unpolished as it gets, sitting on top of the charts. Motörhead's rise brought excess, and Lemmy embodied it fully. With larger venues and bigger earnings came more alcohol, more drugs, and less sleep. Yet somehow, Lemmy stayed professional, rarely missing a show, always delivering, and usually remembering most of the lyrics.
You were either straight or you were rock and roll, you know. There's only two things then. There wasn't all these degrees of rock and roll.
By the early 80s, Motörhead were on top of the rock heap in the UK and Europe. They even made inroads in the United States, where their Iron Fist tour rolled through in 1982 to a growing cult following. Lemmy had finally hit the jackpot. Money was rolling in, though he later admitted he lost most of it, and Motörhead were suddenly national darlings. But the higher you climb, the nastier the fall. The Ace of Spades rush didn't last, and soon Motörhead were about to slam headfirst into reality. Rock history is littered with band breakups, and Motörhead wasn't immune. In 1982, guitarist Eddie Clarke stormed off Mid-American Tour because Lemmy wanted to record a cover of Stand By Me. Eddie thought it was a sellout move and bailed. And just like that, Lemmy lost his right-hand man at the height of Motörhead's rise. But instead of crying about it, he replaced him with Brian Robertson. Together, they put out Another Perfect Day. Not a bad album, but not as good as their previous work. Plus, when they took it on tour, fans were pissed that Eddie had left the band and didn't like the new guitarist. Meanwhile, drummers rotated. Phil Taylor took a break, then Pete Gill stepped in, then he left, and then eventually Taylor returned. And in 1986, Motörhead came back swinging with Orgasmatron, an album that slammed religion, politics, and war. A year later, rock and roll hit shelves, but by then the world around them had changed faster than they could adapt. Metal itself had changed too. Thrash bands like Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer, bands who had borrowed directly from Motörhead's style, were now the leaders of the genre.
Do you get mad if a band copies your style?
No. Good luck to them. Maybe they'll do something we can copy later.
Despite all their influence, however, Motörhead were treated by record companies as irrelevant, and adding to the problem, years of bad management had left Lemmy nearly broke.
I met a lot of millionaires, you know, there's a lot of millionaires in rock and roll, and the more money they got, the more miserable they are. I don't see the point. Because they forget about being happy, they just think about money. You know, that's all they got. And that's a sad thing to have, a pile of money and nothing else. What are you going to do, eat it? Sleep with it?
By now, the band even struggled to secure basic UK tours. So, with about 500 pounds left, he jumped on a plane to Los Angeles. That's the kind of move most washed-up rockers made when they had nothing left. But what looked like decline in Britain became an opportunity in the United States. American fans saw Lemmy as something different. He was the outsider who helped invent thrash. They didn't think of him as a washed-up rocker. They welcomed him as a true pioneer. This influence began to come full circle in the early 90s. James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich of Metallica often spoke openly about how much Motörhead meant to them. In fact, when Lars was a teenager in 1981, he followed the band from show to show and even started a fan club.
Well, Lars was the president of our West Coast fan club one time. There's only him and his mate in it, I think. You know, he came down, let's say, about 1978 or 9. No, it would have been after that. It would have been 81, I guess. when I first met him. We were down at the old Beverly Sunset Hotel, which is now gone. It's a parking lot for Tower. And he came in with his friend, you know, tried to match us drink for drink, which is a foolish thing to do when you're about 14, you know. And he suddenly said, could I go to your room a minute? And I said, yeah, all right. And he went in there and he, very genteel manner, vomited all down his front. So I mopped him up and sent him back out again, you know, poor little devil. But I mean, that's how long I've known him, yeah, a long time.
At their first show, I was immediately invited backstage into their inner sanctum, the dressing room. It was a completely different set of rules and a completely different attitude. Unlike some of the rock stars I've met in Copenhagen years earlier, Motörhead, and in particular Lemmy, embraced me with open arms. There was no preciousness, no mindless banter, no quick picture and off you go. Over the course of the following week, I was in the tour bus with them, in the hotels, the bars, the gas stations, the truck stops. I mean, there were no off-limit areas. I was always welcomed and made to feel like these guys actually cared about me. And Lemmy was so fucking hospitable, like the ultimate party host. He took me under his wing and truly made me feel like I belonged to something that was much greater than myself.
Now, as global superstars, Metallica continued to amplify Lemmy's legacy.
When you talk to guys in Metallica, I mean, your name comes up all the time. Motörhead comes
Still?
up. Absolutely. Absolutely.
My word. How gratifying.
When did
In 1991, Motörhead released 1916, a record that showed surprising introspection. The title track was a somber ballad about World War I soldiers, a stark contrast to what people expected from the man behind Ace of Spades. The gamble paid off. 1916 earned Motörhead a Grammy nomination and restored their standing. Lemmy's career had suddenly found new momentum. By 95, Motörhead finally locked in the lineup that would last the next 2 decades. Lemmy, Phil Campbell on guitar, and Mickey D behind the drums. And for once, Lemmy also landed a decent manager and business team. Throughout the 90s, Motörhead occupied a unique role. They were respected veterans, yet still capable of outplaying younger bands. Albums like Bastard, Sacrifice, and Inferno kept them somewhat relevant. And in 2005, they even won a Grammy Award for covering Metallica's Whiplash.
Thank you, everybody. You've got a lucky face.
It's great. This is the third time the Charm people kept saying to us. So this is amazing. Thank you, Todd Singerman, our manager, and
During the 1990s and 2000s, Lemmy morphed into a cultural reference point, slowly evolving into a living legend. He made cameos in movies and appeared in documentaries and television programs. But he also co-wrote hits for Ozzy, including Mama, I'm Coming Home.
One of the lyrics that Lemmy wrote for me was Mama, I'm Coming Home. And it's really a haunting feeling, because it's like when I give someone who doesn't know what the situation with my wife and I really is, it's kind of spooky when somebody writes a lyric and you sing that lyric and you go, fucking hell, it's so close to home, you know. Every time I play that on stage, it's like I get a chill up my spine, you know.
He experimented with Ice-T, formed a rockabilly group called the Head Cat, and even recorded a theme song for wrestler Triple H.
Did the game track that was written by Jim Johnson in the WWE. I didn't know Lem at all, so when they did it, and it was a long process of me getting to the point where they were like, let's get Motörhead to do this.
I mean, obviously you were a fan.
Yeah,
forever.
Huge, and that was the sound I wanted. The problem was they kept recording this version of the song, and I hated it. And they would say, what do you want it to sound like? And I would say Motörhead, much more like Motörhead, that raw, guttural sound, like that, you know, aggressive. And finally, they were like, well, we would just get Motörhead to do it. And because I didn't know that was an option. If I would have known that was an option in the beginning, I would have just said, let's get Motörhead to do it. And they agreed to do it. And then Lem, didn't know anything about it. They sent him video of me and pictures and stuff. And he's like, okay, I can make that guy. He rewrote the song, did the stuff, and recorded it. it wasn't until later we met and a couple times and, cordial and everything. And then he would come to like the Staples Center. We'd be gonna have TV there or an event there. I'd get a call from Todd, or he'd leave me a message, Lemwood, and say, saw you're at Staples, gonna stop by. I'd get message that he was there. He'd pull in his limo. He'd have our production people wait. He wasn't like a huge fan, so he would sit in the car, and then before my match would come, they'd bring him out. He'd sit in the arena. I'd put him over when I went to the ring. I'd have my match. I'd usually lose. I'd go over to him. He'd go, "You're perfect for Motörhead. You never win." and then
his approach was simple. If it felt cool, he did it. Lemmy didn't care about credibility. He cared about having fun. He wasn't just some untouchable rock icon. If you wanted to meet him, you didn't need a VIP pass. You went to the Rainbow Bar and Grill in Hollywood. 9 times out of 10, he was in a corner with a Jack and Coke at his side, happily chatting to anyone who'd approach him.
And then you'd go down to the Rainbow and find Lemmy. He'd be over there at his beloved Rainbow, and he'd just be writing lyrics, and here you go. And done.
It was a strange contradiction. A chain-smoking, whiskey-soaked ace of spades animal who was also polite, witty, and frighteningly smart.
Yeah, I hang out with him every so often. I mean, I just run into him at places, and he's just one of those kind of guys that's honest and sincere, and doesn't put on any airs or anything. He just is himself, and very cordial. Very cool. Likes to have a drink. I love drinking with him, and that could be any hour of the day or night. And he's in this business. He's one of the genuine guys out there that's no mess, no fuss.
But what truly defined Lemmy was touring. I mean, Motörhead stayed on the road for nearly 40 years. Even in his 60s, long after most musicians had slowed down, Lemmy was still playing like a maniac on stage. However, by the 2010s, even he couldn't outrun his own body any longer. Decades of whiskey, speed, and cigarettes finally demanded payment. He was diagnosed with diabetes and an irregular heartbeat. So, in 2013, doctors fitted Lemmy with a pacemaker. That same year, a blood clot knocked him down, and Motörhead had to cancel shows, something almost unheard of for them. After that, gigs got shaky. Some nights were magic, others cut short. Fans knew what it meant. Lemmy's engine was running out of fuel.
You're one of the best gigs in America, and I would love to play for you, but I can't. I'm old and I'm going to collapse or something. So please accept my apologies. Next time, all right?
For decades, Lemmy looked indestructible, but by this point, he finally had to admit he was mortal. Not that it slowed him down much. He still toured, still recorded, still lived louder than most men half his age. But he got healthier in his own twisted way, like going down from 2 packs of cigarettes a day to just 1 and drinking vodka instead of whiskey. For many fans, Lemmy's persistence was a double-edged image, deeply admirable yet painful to watch. In 2015, Motörhead dropped Bad Magic and hit the road again. Lemmy's voice was shredded, raspier than ever, but the fire was still in there. Tracks like Thunder and Lightning and Till the End sounded like a man staring down the clock, and the clock was accelerating. No one knew it at the time, but when he played in Berlin at the end of that year, that would be his final performance. On December 24th, 2015, Lemmy turned 70 years old. And friends threw him a birthday party at the Whiskey at Go-Go.
Happy birthday, Lemmy! So I got a call from Todd Singerman, and he says, Matt, you're putting a band together for Lemmy's party.
He also celebrated at his favorite place, the Rainbow Bar and Grill. He was obviously pale and tired at the party, but still stubbornly being Lemmy. 2 days later, Lemmy learned the devastating reason his health had suddenly gotten much worse. Doctors diagnosed him with an extremely aggressive cancer. By then, there was nothing to be done.
And in some melancholy news here, Motörhead frontman Lemmy has died at the age of 70, 2 days after learning he had cancer. The British band announced it.
Lemmy died quickly at home on December 28th, just 4 days after his birthday.
There are plenty of tributes to him appearing from friends and rock stars on social media. In the words of his band, he was born to lose but lived to win. In their message on Facebook, the surviving members of Motörhead asked fans to celebrate his life by playing his music loud, having a drink or a few, and sharing stories.
Countless rock stars and fans paid homage to the man who had shown them what true rock and roll attitude looked like.
I think Lemmy is the epitome of rock and roll. You know, he's always lived a wild lifestyle. It's the whole thing, sex, drugs and rock and roll, and he really lived that life. And he loved it, and he lived a life on the traveling, you know.
After his death, the Rainbow Bar and Grill unveiled a life-size bronze statue of him, as did his hometown in England.
When I discovered rock and roll, you know, I love the Beatles and I love hard rock bands and shit. And then I discovered punk rock. And but if there's one band that everyone I know loves, it's Motörhead. Doesn't matter if you love rock and roll, you love Chuck Berry, you love punk rock.
Let there be a lesson to you.
Right. So
I learned my lesson, Lemmy.
Every musician wishes he were you.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah, they do.
No, I don't think so.
The greatest legacy Lemmy left is the music itself.
Motörhead is Motörhead. It's never going to go away. For eternity, people will be listening to Motörhead. Long after we're dust in the ground, new people will be discovering Motörhead for the first time. They created a sound and an attitude that didn't exist before Motörhead, and we wouldn't be here without them.
Motörhead's influence on heavy music is immeasurable.
For me, I thought the man was immortal, you know? He was just this icon of a figure. He was the godfather of heavy music for us. And without him, there certainly wouldn't be a Metallica. Certainly wouldn't. He was the catalyst for Lars and I, getting together.
Bands like Metallica, Megadeth, and Anthrax basically turbocharged the template Lemmy set and openly said so. Also, Lemmy's look and attitude became shorthand for rock and roll rebellion. He was the living embodiment of the slogan, "Born to lose, live to win."
Scale, but nonetheless he managed to influence a lot of people, which could be Metallica or it could be many other bands that have come down the years. I had a message sent to me today from Alice Cooper, who was saying that rock and roll heaven has just gained another heavyweight, and Alice Cooper certainly took something away from what Lemmy was doing and incorporated into his act too.
Lemmy showed that rock music isn't about flawless technique or glossy production. It's about attitude, honesty, and doing it louder than everyone else.
So I've always kind of looked up to Lemmy in terms of the great kind of figurehead of the rock and roll world.
He bridged the gap between punk and metal, uniting fans who just wanted music that felt dangerous and real. In an age where many rock stars carefully craft their public image, Lemmy, simply put, didn't give a fuck. He was by no means a saint. He had his controversies, notably that thorny issue of collecting Nazi memorabilia, which he defended as a history buff and fashion enthusiast.
Isn't it interesting too what he was into? He was like a big World War II buff, like all this
Oh my
weird
God.
stuff you'd never.
Crazy historian, World War II. He was incredibly smart.
Well, I've had 6 black girlfriends so far, so I'm one of the worst Nazis you ever met, right? Imagine going to Nuremberg and introducing my girlfriend to the Fuhrer, you know, like, yeah, I don't think so. I just dress how I like to dress, you know. I don't ask anybody else to do it, you know. It's a free country, supposedly.
But even his critics often prefaced their critiques with a laugh and a shake of the head as if to say, well, you know, that's just Lemmy. Because Lemmy's redeeming quality was that he was honest to himself and honest to us. In other words, he had integrity.
With Lem, what you saw was what he was. He didn't dress like that because that was how you were supposed to look as a rock star. That's just how he wanted to dress. And he acted a certain way, and the things he said, he had just a very simplistic way of looking at the world and life.
He was always himself. He didn't care about anything. So, he just wrote the music he loved playing, and that's kind of what we want to do as well. And he's, I think it's very fitting that Metal Hammer and Download and everybody is paying a tribute to him this year. It should have been done more often when he was still alive, but you know, that's the way it is when icons die. You know, everybody pulls out the big guns, and he more than most people probably deserve this one.
As he roared in the Ace of Spades, you know I'm born to lose. And gambling's for fools, but that's the way I like it. He lived hard, played harder, and inspired millions to live life on their own terms.